everyone, and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady, and today I will be giving you guys the faction focus for Grey Knights. The Grey Knights are one of my personal favorite armies, being one of the only two Imperium armies I currently own. As my friend likes to say, they are the Jedi of Warhammer 40k. They use the Force, they use lightsabers, and they kill the bad guys. With that said, there isn't going to be much lore or fluff for this video. This video is going to be strictly talking about how the Grey Knights are played on tabletop and how to play them efficiently and what their weaknesses are. So if you'd like to become a good competitive Grey Knight player, this is the video that you need to watch. So without any further delay, let's get right into it. First, let's start with a summary of the army. First off, the Grey Knights are one of the most elite armies in the game. You can't really make a horde out of them, and you can't really make a good gun line. You are forced to make an elite list. If you don't know what I mean by that, you can check out my video titled How to Build a Competitive Army List from Scratch to learn about these army types. So they are an elite army, which means your army should look significantly smaller than your opponents unless they are also playing an elite style army. All of the Grey Knights units have heavy points costs but are deservedly so. Let's take their most popular troop choice for an example, the Grey Knight Terminator. Yes, that's right, Grey Knight Terminators are a troop choice. That should give you some insight on how elite the army actually is. Their Terminators are 55 points each, and that's without taking any upgrades. And what that 55 points gives you are all the stats that a normal Terminator would have, but also a Force Halberd, Sword, or Falchions, and Psychic abilities. Did I mention everything that gets affected by their chapter tactic is also a Psyker? This includes Terminators, Dreadnoughts, Dread Knights, and other infantry. And their chapter tactic is +1 to cast and deny psychic spells, which is really good, making this a very psychic heavy army. Because they have access to so many psychers though, their smite is what I like to call mini smite. It's still a warp charge 5, but only does 1 mortal wound at 12-inch range, unless it's against something with the demon keyword, in which case it does a 3 flat mortal wounds, meaning this army counters chaos demons pretty damn hard. Some people think this isn't fair to have them have a smaller smite, but as a Grey Knight player myself, I can assure you that if my army had D3 smites on everything, the army would be severely broken, just like how smite spam from Guard and Chaos is today. Because of this, you don't really want to make an army dedicated to smite like Chaos or Guard would in our current meta. You instead want to focus your army on its biggest strength, and that is Alpha Strikes. Almost everything in the army can deep strike, meaning they can pop into your opponent's lines on turn 1, and you can essentially kill half of their army in one go. Great units to do this are Terminators, Paladins, which are basically Super Terminators, Strike Squads, Purgatron Squads, or Dread Knights. There's one problem that arises from this though, and that's because in match play you need at least half of your units on the board, meaning you can't put your whole Grey Knight army in Deep Strike Reserve like you would like to. There is a solution to that though, and I will get to that pretty soon. One thing that would normally be a problem for a slow elite army is board control, but because of the psychic power Gate of Infinity, this army does not suffer from that problem. Using that spell, you can teleport any Grey Knight unit you want to anywhere on the board again, essentially giving them another deep strike at any point in the game. This is needed in the army because for the most part, everything is pretty slow. The army does have one glaring weakness though, which is needing to deep strike in everything to be efficient. But again, I will soon get to how to fix that problem. Now that I've given a summary of the army and its main playstyle, which is an elite Alpha Strike army, let's get into which units to pick from to make a good list for tournaments. So this list is actually much smaller than people think, because there are only a few units in the book that are capable of hitting hard but also taking a hard hit as well. For every unit in your army costing an arm and a leg, you want it to survive as long as possible. They aren't cheap and disposable like conscripts or cultists or something, so you only want to bring stuff that can hit hard but take a hit as well. So with that said, let's get into the unit choices. For competitive, your HQ choices are Grandmaster Voldus. He's pretty good because he hits like a truck in close combat, and he knows 3 psychic powers and can cast 3 as well. This is huge. With the right army and spell management, you can essentially be able to use every Grey Knight spell over a few units, since this guy knows half of them just by himself. Don't forget too that he also benefits from the chapter tactic, which is +1 to casting and denying. Drago is kind of self-explanatory and an auto-include in my opinion, but only if you're playing with a unit of Paladins because he synergizes extremely well with them. He allows full rerolls of failed hits and also has a 3-up invul, which can go up to a 2-up with a stratagem. There's not much else to say other than he's super survivable and hits like a truck, also the rerolls are nice. And the last option for good HQs, which is going to be the main force in your army, are Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knights. These units are brand new with 8th edition. There were never Grandmaster Dread Knights before, and now that they exist, they will make up the bulk of your competitive army. These guys are super strong right now. They have 12 wounds, meaning they can be targeted even though they are a character, but they have a 2-up armor save and a 4-up invulnerable save that can easily be changed to a 3-up with the spell and then a 2-up with a stratagem. With an army of these, you take one of them as your Warlord and give him first to the fray as his Warlord trait, which allows him and other Grey Knights within 6 inches of him to re-roll failed charges. Then you drop him and 4 other Grandmaster Dread Knights beside him. Yes, I said 4 others. And you proceed to destroy half of your opponent's army in one turn. The loadouts you want to take are the heavy Sciencers and heavy Psy Cannons, and either hammers or swords depending on the rest of your list. Both guns are great at being anti-infantry, but both are also okay at damaging vehicles, making them solid choices. Also, their swords and hammers are absolutely great at destroying vehicles in one charge. I once killed an Imperial Knight in close combat with 1 Dread Knight and some shooting. They are strong as hell in close combat. The reason that you want to use Grandmaster Dread Knights over regular ones is because all of their guns are heavy weapons, including their hammer. And they don't have the rule that allows them to move and shoot normally, so you take the Grandmaster version because he normally hits on a 2+, which then becomes a 3+ when he moves or deep strikes, which is still perfectly fine. 3+ is Space Marine shooting. When a normal Dread Knight would normally hit on 3s, which means if he moves or deep strikes, he will hit on 4s, which means you're only as consistent as guard shooting now, which isn't very preferable. So it's definitely worth the extra points to just use them as all Grandmasters in a Supreme Command detachment and have them all deep strike so you can get your Alpha Strike off. Also, having them being characters, they synergize with some stratagems that we will get into in a minute. Moving on, let's go over the troops you will want to take, which is nothing. All of the troops are too expensive for what they do. That doesn't mean they are bad, it's just that they aren't as efficient as other options in the game. And when aiming to build a competitive list, you always want to build the most cost-effective and points-efficient army as possible to give yourself a mathematical advantage over your opponent. This is a math game after all, and if you know how to abuse that, you will do great. For casual games, the Strike Squads can work inside of Razorbacks, and Terminators can work out in Deep Strike. But that's only for casual games. I've done lots of testing, and it seems that Dread Knight spam is the only way to go right now for Grey Knights. For the elite choices, Dreadnoughts are okay, especially if you only take one and give it Astral Aim every turn. Astral Aim is a Grey Knight spell that allows a unit to see everything on the board, even if terrain is in the way, and make its shots ignore cover bonuses. I say only bring one in match play because you can only cast that spell once, so there isn't a point in bringing more. Also, you're going to want to put points elsewhere. Preferably, I wouldn't even bring one, but if you're kind of picking and choosing on how to make a list and you need to fill up some spots for points, then using one is perfectly okay. Paladins are a good choice, but probably not the best. They are Terminators with 3 attacks and 3 wounds. I've had good and bad testing with these guys, and it's almost to the point where I think they are slightly too expensive and not as points efficient as a Nemesis Grandmaster. The combo that I used that I did like, which is extremely strong in casual games, is 10 Paladins with Drago and an Apothecary. Normally I think Apothecaries are bad, but with Paladins having 3 wounds each, it's actually a pretty good combo. In casual games, this combo seems way too OP, but in competitive games, it can sometimes be put into its place if your opponent has enough weight of fire. Sure, they have 3 wounds and 2 saves, but they're still only toughness 4 infantry, so your opponent can force you to roll a lot of dice, which in turn will probably kill the unit. Also, if your opponent happens to have anything that does a flat 3 damage, your unit is pretty much toast. If you do decide to go the Paladin route, always cast Sanctuary, which is the +1 spell on them to give them 4++s, so they have the same saves as your Nemesis Grandmasters. Also, they are an amazing target for Hammerhand. I've killed Knights with these guys after giving them Hammerhand. There is a stratagem called Psybolt, which gives your Stormbolters +1 strength and -1 AP, meaning at rapid fire range with your 40 shots hitting on 3s, rerolling everything because of Drago, and then most likely wounding on 3s or 2s, you will annihilate screens with no problem. If your meta is nothing but a bunch of cheap screens, then you should probably at least use 1 unit of 10 of these guys instead of one of the Grandmasters. That way you can at least have something that will completely annihilate a screen on turn 1. So these are the most points efficient units in the army. There are a few more, but they don't really fit into the list, and I will explain why in the next segment, which is army list building. So the only Grey Knight lists that have been doing well, which I mentioned earlier, are Grandmaster Dread Knight spam. After making a list with 5 of them upgraded to the way they should be, the list comes out to 1,450 points. So here's the problem with this. If you want to deep strike all 5 of these Grandmasters, that means you need 5 units on the board as per the rules for match play. If you look through the Grey Knight's Codex, there is no possible combination of units you can make in any detachment that will be less to or equal to the remaining 550 points that are left over. So this is the main problem with the army, but there is an easy solution. Imperial Guard. As much as you might not want to hear it, you need to place some guard detachments alongside your Grey Knight detachment for a couple of reasons. First reason, it's easy and cheap way to get command points. A battalion of guard can be as cheap as 200 points. And the other reason to do this is because this detachment will give you the 5 units needed to place on the board to be able to place 5 of your Grey Knight units into Deep Strike. They're also so cheap that if they die on turn 1 because they're the only thing on the board, you don't really care about it. Whereas if you put some Grey Knight stuff on the board, if you only had a couple of strike squads and stuff, they would most likely all be gone by turn 2 when the rest of your army arrives. So I would highly recommend getting a battalion and a couple other units of guard to play alongside your Grey Knights to help them be competitive. The other things I would do to fill it out, because you'll only have spent around 200 something points on the battalion, add in a couple of tanks or Earthshaker cannons or anything that's long range anti-tank, which is the only thing the Grandmasters are really missing, is stuff like last cannons and battle cannons, stuff that's going to hit pretty hard from ranged. So use your guard battalion to throw a couple of those units in to even out the army and make it very, very strong. And don't forget too, you're going to want a Supreme Command detachment with 5, I repeat, 5 Nemesis Grandmaster Dread Knights, because they are the, hands down, strongest part of this army. Now that I've gone over how to build a competitive list, let's talk about the Warlord traits and Relics. For Warlord traits, you are always going to want to take first to the fray on your Warlord, which will be one of your Grandmasters. The other Warlord traits are good, but this one is just too good to pass up since all your Dread Knights will wreck face in close combat. For Relics, you don't really have many to choose from if you're running the competitive list that I'm talking about. But the one I like the most is the Banner of Refining Flame if you end up using the squad of 10 Paladins. This relic trades in the mini smite for a D6 mortal wound smite, but only at 6-inch range, which is where the paladins want to be anyway, since they're really geared towards close combat other than their stormbolters. They have lots of shots, but absolutely wreck stuff in close combat. Now let's get into stratagems. For the stratagems, here are the ones that you will use the most. Truesilver Armor. For 1 command point, use this when one of your Dread Knights are about to get smited by everything your opponent has. You get a 5+ Feel No Pain on that model for all mortal wounds caused in the Psychic phase. This is a great way to bait out your opponent into moving all of his guys in range to smite one of your Dread Knights to death, and this stratagem can most likely save its life. Only in death does duty end. For 1 command point, you can allow your character who was just slain to fight again or shoot again. If you're following this guide and using an army of Dread Knight Grandmasters, then you should have 5 to 6 targets for this stratagem, making it extremely good in a competitive setting. It's a great trap to set up for your opponent, especially when you use it on a Nemesis Grandmaster. Psychic Channeling. For 1 command point, this stratagem is pretty good. It allows you to roll 3 dice and pick the 2 highest when rolling for a Psychic spell. This synergizes great with Vortex of Doom, since you need a roll of a 12 to do D6 mortal wounds instead of just a flat 3. This stratagem is the best chance you have of getting that off. It's also useful when trying to roll high enough for a spell that you know your opponent wants to deny, like Sanctuary. There are multiple ways to use this stratagem, but those are the 2 main ways that I use it. The Aegis, 2 command points. This does the exact same thing as Psychic Channeling, except for denying instead of casting. Use this to help higher your chances of denying an enemy spell that really needs to be denied, like Magnus's +1 invul spell. Heed the Prognosticars. For 2 command points, you can boost a friendly Grey Knight's character's invul by 1. Use this when going into combat with something that might one-shot your Grandmaster. This is the most efficient on Drago, but it does work on Grandmaster Dread Knights just as well. Psychic Onslaught. 2 command points. This ability is great on your Dread Knights because it raises the strength of their guns by 1 and adds an extra -1 AP. This turns their guns into some pretty decent anti-tank. I would usually use the stratagem once per psychic phase. Psybolt Ammunition, 2 command points. This raises the strength of storm bolters by 1 and gives them -1 AP. This is great if you're using the paladin version of the list. Your paladin squad will annihilate any infantry unit they shoot at with this stratagem. Want a conscript screen gone? Say no more. This is your answer. Finest Hour, 2 command points. Double the distance of any aura abilities a friendly character has. This is great on your Warlord when dropping him in with all of the other Dread Knights. Because of the size of their bases, it might make it hard to get them all within the 6-inch range of your Warlord to reroll 1s to hit, and to reroll failed charges because of the Warlord trait. This stratagem is usually very crucial in getting off a great Alpha Strike, because it allows you to space out your units a little bit more, so you can shoot and charge the units you actually want to, and you don't get cornered into having to put everything in one big bubble. That's it for the stratagems. Sure, there are a lot more, and most of them are useful for the most part, but the units that you would use them on aren't going to be used in the competitive setting, so I left them out. Also, Games Workshop would give me shit if I read the whole codex to you guys, so those are the ones you will use in competitive play. And then there's one thing I feel I should mention to help you with the army. Don't worry about using all of your command points on turn 1. This is an Alpha Strike army, meaning you need to kill half of their army in 1 turn to win the game. In order to do this, throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at them. Use every stratagem you need to net yourself the biggest advantage you can get on turn 1. If you end turn 1 with 0 command points left, that's fine. If you played right, half of your opponent's army should be dead or severely wounded. Now this is the point where I would go over strategy and how to defeat the army. And I guess I'll do it, but in a very quick summary. So I've kind of been mentioning it the whole time, but the strategy behind the army is very simple. Deep strike all of your Grandmasters right in front of the enemy, and then shoot the units that are the biggest target priority at that time, and then charge the units that are the biggest priority at that time. With this, you should, if you do it right and you have good target priority, and also if you don't roll completely garbage, you should annihilate half of your opponent's army. Now for the guard detachment that should be in your list, that guard detachment really doesn't matter. Just add a couple of anti-tanks, shoot those at the tanks that you need to kill that your Grandmasters couldn't get to because maybe of a screen or something like that. And then all the conscripts you have are just meant to go grab objectives and just sit in your backfield. That's about it. It's very simple strategy. All you do, drop in, shoot the stuff you need to shoot, and that's it. As for how to counter Grey Knights, with the release of the Tyranid Codex, they are going to be the new anti-psyker, which a lot of stuff in their codex can hurt Grey Knights pretty bad. Also, I think volume of fire will kill these guys as well. Sure, they're pretty good and their invols are all pretty good, but if your opponent's stacking like last cannons and something, if they have like 20 last cannons, then realistically 2 or 3 of your Dread Knights should die in 1 turn. Which is why you really need the Alpha Strike, so you can get in there, kill all of their last cannons and anti-tank, and that way your Dread Knights can live throughout the whole game. If you kill all of their anti-tank, you will win the game. So that should be your #1 priority on turn 1, is kill as much anti-tank as you possibly can. If you do that, you will win the game as the Grey Knight player. So that concludes the Grey Knight faction focus. If I missed anything you care about, let me know in the comments and I will answer as best as I can. If there's anything I can do to improve on these videos, let me know down in the comments. Well anyways, I hope I taught you guys something. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my video for more Warhammer 40k content. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy wargaming!